Okay. All right. So go ahead and drop the intro.
All right. Good morning.
Or afternoon.
Or afternoon. Yeah. How long have we been here so far?
I don't know.
This
It's
is
been a
Get It
while.
Raw, and we are here for another episode, new episode. Welcoming our friend Brian to the show. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, guys.
Hey, man. It's a pleasure. Go ahead and introduce yourself for a little bit.
Okay.
You know.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and what I do. My name is Brian Rippl. Currently, I'm working with a prison ministry. We call it a prison ministry, but really we work in the local county jail, and a group of guys together have created a program where we go in and bring the gospel to prisoners, and we established a program outside of the jail as well. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Oh, that's cool. I wonder if you know our friend Tom. He does something similar to that, and he's a great guy. It's a very worthy and admirable position to be in. By the way, I wanted to say I think you have the coolest last name ever. Ever.
Thank you.
It is. I was telling Deanna that she should do a podcast called The Ripple Effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man,
So cool. I think that's the greatest name, besides Champion.
That might even be good for your son if he did on the
yeah.
pitching. That would be
Yeah,
great,
yeah.
I think, for pitching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great idea, actually. The tiny ripples becomes waves, wow. All right. So anyway,
Yeah. We can go. Lots
Somebody
of
might
ways
want to
with that.
copyright that.
Yeah.
Or is that a
cool.
website?
I don't.
We could get it, squat on it. I just heard that term the other day, squatters or squatting. Yeah, squatting on a website. Like
really?
you just buy out a bunch of websites and you squat, you hold them until somebody comes along that's like, oh man, this is the website I need for whatever it is. You're like, well, I own it. You can buy it, and then you sell out.
Oh man, well, that might be a way to go from a business perspective. But anyway, let's get started with what do you want to talk about? What do you want to do?
Yeah, so I was, one of the things that I've learned through the prison ministry is a lot of these guys that go into jail are addicted to drugs and alcohol, and when they come out, they're still, even though they're forced to be sober in jail, they're still dealing with the same issues that got them in there in the first place. And that's what's kind of unique about our program, because there's lots of prison ministries out there, and there's people that go into the jails and they talk to them and they tell them what they should be doing. We take a little bit of different approach to it. We have two programs running in correlation. So when someone's in the jail, when they come out, they're going to see the same faces. We're going to be covering the same materials. In fact, they won't even miss a beat if they go from the jail to our meetings, and the meetings are pretty small. We do them in our homes, and we don't have any church affiliation. In fact, I don't know that any two people in our prison ministry go to the same church. Yeah, we've met through different circumstances, and when the gentleman that started it and myself, we met through different circumstances, and we developed this thing, and one of the key things that we try to focus our attention on is relationships. We kind of find that relationships are the downfall to most people in addiction, whether that's early on or later. Even people who've been sober for a long time can relapse because of relationships.
And why do you think that is? What is it about a relationship that spurs the addiction or exacerbates the addiction?
I think there's a lot of emotions involved in relationships, and you can get too involved too early sometimes. There's lots of different reasons, but I think it's emotion, and not knowing how to deal with those emotions, and not establishing good boundaries in the relationship. And that's one of the things we try to teach them. I personally, we have some guidelines that for our ministry, but each person has their own kind of flavor. Now, I've been in the jail, but mostly my focus is outside the jail, mentoring ships. And currently, because of COVID, we don't have anybody in the jail. We're not even, for a year, we haven't been allowed to be in the jail. So right now we're just in a season of building leaders, and working with people as they get out that the jail actually sends us. So in the past, we met a lot of resistance in the jail. Like it took 2 years just for us to get in. And then some of the guys that we brought along and started developing as leaders, they, because of their past record, they couldn't even get into the jail. So it took a long time, and and now we've kind of had, I don't know if I want to call it a setback, but it's definitely hard to do a prison ministry when you can't even go in the jail.
And these guys that you developed as leaders, they have a relationship with the guys that are still in, right? And that's one of the benefits. Or no?
Well, jail's such short term. They have relationships with the people that are out, but hopefully, I mean, the goal is that they don't go back in after they come back out, right? That's the main goal. But most of the time, it's kind of new relationships, and so in at least in our county, the jail system has a special section for people who are of Christian faith, and I don't even actually, they don't even have to be Christian faith, but they want to be in a religious environment in jail. They'll actually, if they're nonviolent offenders and they know they're there just short term and they're not going to go to prison, they have the option of going into this, and that provides them with some latitude to have access to visitors who are going to talk to them about God or whatever. And some people are in there just because, they know that it's a safer environment. They have no desire to have a relationship with God. They have no desire to probably even get sober, and they're just using the system. But there are, people in there who are genuinely wanting to change, and are making efforts to do so. And those are the people we're really looking for,
Right.
Weed out the ones who are just there using the system, and try to find the people that want to change.
But even if they're there getting, passively getting this information. And you said that it doesn't have to be of a Christian origin. Like they could be a Buddhist or an atheist and still attend. And
that's right.
They're welcomed, huh?
That's right. Yeah. And there's Muslims that go into the prison, and Christians, and I don't know all the groups, because we just have a time slot, right? And it was ironic that Sunday was the time slot that was available.
Huh.
Yeah. So we'd be at church, and some of the guys would miss church so that they could go into the prisons or into the jail and provide church for these guys. But it's not passive. We're not passive in there. And one of the things that we really believe strongly in, and I don't want to get into a lot of this, but I will touch on it, that we think that a lot of times people go into these things and they in this mentorship, and they try to give you what they know. And that's good too, but all we want to do is just expose them to God and to Christ. And part of that is giving them something and letting them read it. Mm-hmm. So instead of me reading a Bible verse to you, Joe, I say, "Here, Joe, read this out loud." Okay? Because when you hear it in your own voice, right? And you're reading it with your own eyes, it's a different experience than if I'm reading it to you.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And it becomes real. And I think, from my experience, God is real. So whatever you believe is fine, but God is real, and he wants to have a relationship with me. I can't do that for them. They really have to do it for themselves. I can just show them the way I did it. But so that's one key part of the relationship thing of sobriety that I think is real important, and the statistics show it. I don't have the statistics with me. I'm not a statistics guy, but I know that through what I've read and what I've heard, and what I've experienced, that when God is in the mix of your recovery, your chances of succeeding are tenfold.
Yeah, I was talking to a physician about this yesterday, and we were having that very discussion about. It's interesting because Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about not necessarily God, but a higher power, right? And that's like a God, right? So the point is that she was saying the same thing. She said that when you involve a higher power or God, you have far more success. And my curiosity, I'm just from my nature, why Why is that? Is that a change in the locus of control? Is that an internal locus to an external locus, or is it I don't know why. So why in your opinion, why is that so much more comforting? Why does that make such a large impact to you and to the gentleman that you're counseling to?
That's a great question. The it's going to be hard to measure. It's going to be hard to write it down and say what it is. But if you believe that God is the creator of all beings, if you believe that, where did we come from? What is the origins of who humans are? If you believe we've come from aliens, I think it's going to be tough. But if you believe that you have a creator and someone's created this world, how could he not fix the problem of your addiction, right? And you can get deep into that. You can say, well, then why did God ever create addiction? But why does anything exist on this earth? This is my burden. Alcoholism is my burden to bear.
Right.
I maybe I was born with it. Maybe I created it myself, but I stepped across the line and said, I need this to get to be comfortable. I need this to be happy. I need this to whatever. And when I stepped across that line, it became my burden. Mm-hmm. And then when I was able to overcome it, it's still my burden. Like, I'm better, but I'll never be completely whole. So everybody's got that. If you don't have it and you're young, maybe you're 16, you probably haven't experienced what your burden is, but your burden will show up and you'll have to learn how to manage it, or it's going to destroy you.
That's interesting that, you started with relationships, and then we're talking about God right now, but that's a relationship.
Right.
And so you feel like there's something out there, my creator, and they love me.
Right.
And they're there to help me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're speaking to. And therefore you have a relationship. Mm-hmm. And you may not feel like you have a relationship with anybody else, but at least you have that.
Yeah.
And that kind of saves you, huh?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I was going to say the thought of burdens, and I never thought about it like that. Like, we all are going to have something major in our lives, if not multiple major burdens to overcome. And if we think about it as, why me, poor me, it takes away from everybody else's burdens and it just makes you feel like you're singling yourself out. And that just adds more weight to the burden to carry. But having somebody else to share that burden with, any burden, is always going to make it easier, to help carry the weight. I mean, if we're talking literally, so two people, and I've heard it put, that a problem shared is a problem cut in half, something like that, to that effect. And that makes a lot of sense. Even coming with a friend, or sitting down or kneeling down and praying about the problem, about whatever it is, just even bringing it to verbal airwaves lightens a little bit of that load, either a little bit or sometimes even a lot, just to get it out there, get it off your chest. I mean, again, I'm using a lot of analogies, I think, or metaphors, a lot of metaphors, but they really hold true. I mean, when you do start to practice something like prayer, or even group therapy, group counseling, or group meetings, group discussions, just talking about it and having somebody else, anybody else, sometimes it is only your higher power or God to share it with and talk it with. It just helps lighten that load. It helps let you kind of take a deeper breath, take the next step and do something more.
Something I've always wondered is that, when you struggled, it was right after like a relationship had like ended. Those
were some of my toughest times.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's not like you don't have relationships, but it would be a particular romantic relationship. And when those fell apart, that's when you kind of, in essence, fell apart too. Why? Why that particular relationship versus the relationships? Because you have a lot of great friends that stick with you. Why that? Why does that push you? And then like, how does that help you as well? Because Brian, you could probably speak to that too, right? Like, how does that help you? But then, have you ever had a problem where a romantic relationship ended and then it kind of pushed you, or maybe not pushed you, but you kind of fell at that point?
Well, I've been married to the same woman for now 24 years. So the
Hallelujah.
last time I was in a relationship was a long time. I've always been the person. Back then, I'm really rewinding my memory here, but to say back then, I was at that time I was an atheist. At the best, I was an agnostic, and at that time probably a womanizer, and very very selfish, and so I always broke up with girls. I didn't allow them to break up, and I always had multiple girls. And God, I hope my wife doesn't listen to this. But she changed me because she's an amazing person, and that's I'm not just saying that, but she helped me to come to Christ through her persistence and example, and I owe that to her. That's eternal debt that I owe to her. But back to your question with the relationships, I'm not sure, but I do know this. I do know every guy that I've ever worked with who's failed, it's been because of a relationship. And I think early on, maybe we form these relationships and they're good or bad with our parents and our siblings or whatever, but we can't change that. That's our past. We can't really change that. But what we can do, and what I try to teach guys is like, what is a healthy relationship, mm-hmm. and how to set up and define boundaries. So I use this example, and I think this is a great example, and it's not mine, and I've put my spin on it or whatever. And you might read a book and say, oh yeah, I remember him talking about that. It's like a circle of rings. I wish I could show you the picture, but imagine a circle of rings. So in the center of that circle, like a target, in the center of that circle is you and God. Everybody else fits into this ring, but in the smallest ring, in the center, the bullseye, is you and God. And then outside of that ring is your closest relationships. If you're a teenager, it'll be your mom, your dad, and your siblings. Mm-hmm. And then outside of that, it becomes discretionary. Okay, so who's in the next ring? Those might be your best friends. And then beyond that, maybe your coworkers and your neighbor and blah blah blah. And then outside of that might be, I don't know, Hitler and Osama bin Laden.
Oh, jeez.
Everybody fits inside of this circle somewhere. They're all there. The people that hurt you the most, they're all there. Okay. Now it's going to be a little while before Osama and I go out for ice cream. Mm-hmm. He's got a lot of apologizing to do.
Well, he's diabetic too, so he's got to be careful. Well, maybe that's how we should have took him out.
Right.
Just take him out for ice cream.
There might not be any kidney dialysis in hell. I don't know. So what I'm saying is we have to learn these healthy boundaries, because if we don't have them, we're gonna destroy our lives. And if you've never been taught this, then you don't know how to do this, right? And sometimes we get too involved. So take, for example, a mom. This is a real common relationship thing. So you have a mom who has this teenage son, and now he grows up and he meets a woman and he gets married. The mom's no longer in the same circle in that relationship anymore. She's moved
mm-hmm.
out. The mm-hmm. wife's in that position. If the mom doesn't recognize that and abide by that, she's going to destroy that relationship. Until she does. She's going to damage it.
That's a good point. That is a good point.
So that really doesn't appeal to recovery, although it does appeal to relationships, right? So then, but there's lots of examples like that.
Yeah.
Where you don't know your position.
What about you? What do you think about that?
I think that part of it, or I think that that we make relationships with that substance as well. So when a serious relationship like a romantic relationship comes to an end, especially one that was maybe a little longer, more serious, that person was part of our support system, part of, you know, who we would share our other burdens with and use them to kind of lean on, and then they're gone. They would be closer in that circle to us probably than our friends were at that point, who would be on that outside of our circle, or out further outside that circle. So when they're gone, our friends, one of our friends doesn't usually take that spot. We need something closer. And it could, you know, then that's where I think we go back to a substance or relapse, because we have that relationship where we say, okay, what do I know, and what's basically what always has been there for me. I mean, we've heard it and see it all the time, but it's just an easy crutch. It's almost like a crutch to fall back on. Like, okay, this relationship is over. In the meantime, or right away, like, I can do this. I can be, you know, feel better, and you know, then of course everything else may start to fall apart. You know, with short time, long time.
So how much of this, of an addiction, whether it's alcohol or marijuana or whatever, how much of it is physiological versus psychosocial or even cultural?
I think that depends on the drug, but
Yeah.
that's a short answer. Yeah. It
Yeah.
depends on the drug. What I will say is this, and just to step back just a second, because I don't want to forget this, because if you're struggling with drugs or alcohol, more importantly, if you're struggling with drugs, because alcohol's in your face all the time, you got to learn to deal with that differently than drugs. Drugs, I think, in some ways, and people argue with me about this, is easier, and because you don't have to associate with the people that you buy your drugs from and you use your drugs from.
Right.
You don't have to associate them. If you watch TV, you're going to see a beer ad. If you go into a grocery store, you're going to see beer. You're going to go into a convenience store, you're going to see beer. You're going to go to a party, no matter where that party is, and somebody's going to be like, "Hey, you want a beer? You want a beer?" All night long you'll hear it. So if you're not prepared for that, it's hard.
Yeah.
The biggest advice I give anybody is say, and they almost never take it, is say, take your phone and get rid of every contact that you've ever bought drugs from, used drugs with. You've got to cut those people out of your life. And this comes into the healthy boundary things. Oh, well, that's my best friend. Is he your best friend? Like, he's going to cause you to stumble. So you've got to move him out of that circle. And what I don't usually tell them is I say, you know, once you get sober, you can bring them back into that fold when you're healthy once again. The truth is they're never going to want that person in their life as long as they're using. All they had in common was the use.
See, that's interesting that you say that, because you're talking about relationships, and then as they sober up, you're like, you got to get rid of that relationship because it's toxic.
You got to
Right.
get rid of that before you can sober up.
Yeah.
You got to get rid of that, or you're going back to jail. Like, it's serious. Like, that's the number one piece of advice I can give somebody relation wise who's using and abusing. Get rid of those relationships. And It's hard. It may be the person that you love. It may be your wife. I mean, I'm grateful that, you know, my wife doesn't. She's had 3 drinks in 25 years. But if my wife was also an alcoholic, I would never get out of that. It would just wouldn't happen.
So then I take it, like, when you look at countries that are socialized, like Portugal, Austria, Switzerland, in comparison to the States, why are we doing so bad with helping people? Do they need to be in prison if they're suffering from addiction? Because they're really not learning, they're not rehabbing that well. So what is it? What are we doing wrong? And this speaks to the context of the physiological addiction versus what you've been talking about as the relationships. So what could we do better in the States to help lower the addiction rates? What could we do better in the States to help with crime? Because there's a lot of things associated with addiction, you know? So why do you think there's a big difference between the States and those countries?
I really don't know the statistics of those other countries. If you're telling me they're better, then I'm gonna say assume you're right. But I can speak to what we could do better. Incarceration doesn't work for addiction, so you have to really. I think our local government needs to look at this particular issues of who is the offender and why are they offending, and if it's because they're a bad person, then they should lock them up for longer. If it's because they deem and judge that it's because they have an addiction, then they should try to help them.
Right.
Incarceration doesn't do it. Now we do have programs like that. We have diversion programs and drug court and those types of things, and they do work. But they only work, when somebody's really ready and committed to change, because you can't do it for them. No one could do it for me. I mean, God helped me, but it had to come from my choice to decide to become sober.
Right.
So I would think that would be the one thing that I could say you could change. Teaching them about things, what drug court and some of these things do is teach people how to live, because maybe they've never learned how to live.
Sure.
There's guys that don't know how to do it, don't know how to balance a checkbook. Not that we need to do that much anymore,
Right.
but they don't know how to have a schedule. Like they don't know how to get to work on time. These seem like, for some people, these are basic things, but for them, they've just never really been taught that. So if you don't have that father figure in your life, and or you don't have that person that comes along and teaches you those things, then you just never learn them. So those things are definitely helpful. I mean, you can find yourself in financial trouble, and if you can't get to work on time,
Yeah.
and that can lead to other problems, which eventually lead to, how do I solve these problems? And you go back to the default of what and that's whatever your drug of choice is. And,
Well, it's interesting because, you and I have had these conversations before. When you look at like roughly 20 to 25 years ago, back in like the 90s, you had Portugal and the United States. They were both looking at the highest addiction rates in the world. They were trying to come up with a solution. Portugal took the results of what's called Rat Park. Have you ever heard of those studies?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So they looked at the outcomes of that, and they applied that through their socialized government.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very, very supportive. If you have an addiction, they're going to put you in a support group. They're going to subsidize your housing, so that way now you have a place to stay. They're going to subsidize your employment, so now you have a job. In some cases, with Austria, they'll even like provide you with if you're addicted to heroin, for instance, you can go to a clinic and get the heroin with a clean needle under medical supervision. And the remarkable thing is that their addiction rates are now the lowest in the world. They just drop off. Many of the users who go to these heroin clinics, they go maybe 1 to 3 times, and then they're done. And they're doing it in a safe manner, but they're subscribing to a lot of things that we're talking about. But, going to support groups, finding a higher purpose, having employment, having housing. Whereas in the United States, we doubled down on the war on drugs. And what we did was we just kept incarcerating people. And now that you have like prison for profit and jails for profit, there's a lot of money in incarcerating somebody for a dime bag of weed, or for an open bottle in the car, or for some heroin. But we incarcerate them, but we don't rehabilitate them. And then when they get out, they don't have, harder for them to get housing, okay? Hard for them to get employment,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And their support group is not, they don't have to go to a support group. They're not enrolled in any support groups unless they do it voluntarily, right? Or if it's part of their probation, but some of them may violate that. Their support group is going back to the people that they were getting in trouble with anyway, the people that they were buying the drugs from, the people that they were drinking with. And what we understand from a medical perspective is that lack of that relationship with a healthy person, a healthy relationship, allows you to release oxytocin, allows you to release dopamines, allows you to release a number of other hormones and neurotransmitters to help you feel loved. Rocco, I'm not talking about you.
I'm sorry, guys. I forgot breakfast.
He's getting mad. Yeah. No. So basically, the point is that when you're in a loving relationship, you're gonna release hormones and neurotransmitters that let you to help you feel loved and belong, and you're gonna belong to something. And you it's like a runner's high. It's like exercise.
Yep.
Okay. Now, if you don't have that, or that relationship crumbled, and you get that artificial high from an exogenous substance like heroin or an opioid drug or alcohol, then or even cannabis, right? Then you become reliant on that. And the people that you're doing it with are doing it as well. So now you are receiving, let's say, oxycodone or heroin. You're releasing, so you're getting that oxytocin effect with people that are also using with you, so you feel like you belong and you love within that support group, and it makes it even harder for you to break down that relationship. And then you go to jail, and guess who's in there? People that are in the same position you are. And then we isolate them in a cage, all right, for a certain period of time, and expect them to be sober. But we know from the studies before Rad Park that doesn't necessarily work either. So I feel like we're failing people. And I feel like we could be more proactive and preventative and help them with what you're talking about, help them develop relationships.
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying is all great. I do think that maybe comparing one country to another is maybe apples and oranges, because culturally we're different. You'd have to measure so many facets to try to say, well, this will work here because is the divorce rate the same? There's just too many things to say that there's a magic bullet to kill this thing. But I do agree with you that I really don't like the whole punishment after punishment thing, and that's the thing that probably of our system that bothers me the most, is because these guys get out of jail, like you were saying, and they can't find a job. They can't find a place to live. I mean, now I think that there's wisdom in that when you have violent offenders, rapists and murderers. I think there may be just a good argument to say that you should probably never let them out. But
Sure.
if you did let them out, they should probably be monitored. But like you're saying, if you're arrested for drugs and whatever, if you've served your time, I just don't think that the public should have access to that anymore. It's hard to do because now we have digital tattoos, right? So if you get arrested, you can have it expunged and
Maybe.
sealed. Maybe one time in Florida, but expunged and sealed. But that doesn't eliminate the internet. And if you've got your face somewhere tattooed, you can't get rid of it completely. You can bury it, but if somebody looks deep enough, they can find out the information about you in your past. So, but I think, preventing people from getting work and stuff, that's just a terrible thing. If they've served their sentence, they've done their time, they've done their penance, they should be able to move on. So that's one of the things that I actually focus on as part of my thing is I run my own business. It's a small business. I do like interior remodeling and commercial and residential, and a lot of times I hire these guys on and try to teach them the ropes of not necessarily of running a construction business, because I don't need any more competition, but teach them just about running business in general. If I find somebody that's got some ability that I think, this person could do this, because that may be the only way that they actually have a normal kind of life is to start their own business, because it's not an easy road, but it may appeal more to their personality as well. To have autonomy, to be when they get in a situation, they can just say, you know what, I'm going to walk away from this situation. You're an employee. You can't do that. You got to deal with the situation. But if you're a, unhealthy person from the begin with, you may not want that person to deal with the situation with how they know how to deal with it. So, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, yeah, that's.
But think about what you just said. You just came up with some great points. What you're doing is you're establishing a relationship. Mm-hmm. You're helping them find a purpose. Mm-hmm. Okay? Think about the child that grows up in the ghetto, and it doesn't matter what color they are, but they just grow up in the ghetto, and they see their parent, go to jail, maybe one or both. Now they have a hard life. Mm-hmm. The people that they see that are able to do well for themselves aren't necessarily role models for a society that we want to live in. Mm-hmm. So they grow up and they kind of emulate that, and then they get in trouble. And then when they get out and they try to go the straight and narrow, they can't. Mm-hmm. So they got to fall back. And then when they're in that jail, in that prison, they're not learning a purpose. Like you're teaching people practical skills that will survive, that will last them the rest of their life. They learn from other criminals on how to become a better criminal, because they know when they get out, the likelihood that they'll have an opportunity to live a good life on the straight and narrow isn't there as easily. It's not accessible. But when we talk about like countries like Austria took the lead from Portugal. Portugal, yeah, they're socialized, but they were in in just their position on drug addiction was just as bad as the United States 20 years ago. The difference was they said what we are doing isn't working. And so when are we going to say as a country what we are doing is not working? The war on drugs, it has been an immense failure. I mean, and for goodness sakes, we're hypocrites. Reagan, through Nicaragua with the was it the Sandinistas, with Iran Contra, smuggled drugs across the border to buy guns to give to other people. A Republican president who at the same time was saying at the other side of his mouth, or his wife's mouth, say nope to dope. And then we have every president has pretty much continued those programs, since then. Then you have, it's just, to me, there's just a lot of hypocrisy with that. Then we support Big Pharma, which is pushing opioid drugs on populations, especially certain populations around the country. And the war on drugs isolates, Central American countries and South American countries, in which case they're our neighbors, so we probably should want the best relationship with them. But how many of their citizens, women and children, have to succumb to gang violence and drug cartels, in which case we prop up some of these cartels to fight against communist parties, and then they become very powerful, and then they end up harming their fellow neighbors. And so I don't think the war on drugs has been successful at all. So, but when do we finally say enough of the same strategy? Let's apply a new strategy and see how effective that is. Because otherwise, it's like what Einstein said: you're insane if you keep doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting a different result. And look at all the money we're wasting. Wasting a ton of money.
Yeah, and that's probably a little above my pay grade. So I will say that if it's an important issue to you, then you get involved. So it was an important issue to me, and I'm involved. And I'm not going to change. I can't even. You got an American flag here. I can't change all these stars. I can't even change that one star, Florida. I'm just hoping to change that little, those few people in my life, and that's it. Like just getting involved, right? We don't need the government to step in and tell us how to do it, but we do need them to change some of the ways that they govern. And yeah, there's been lots of corruption. Wherever there's money, there's going to be corruption. Wherever there's power, there's going to be corruption, and people are going to get hurt from it. But yeah, I don't know.
But I think you're doing a lot more than you actually know. I think when you look at like what happened with the crack epidemic, where you had the Reagan administration collude with Oliver North and the CIA, bringing crack in the predominant cities, and predominantly the regions of color. And you're talking about Los Angeles, you're talking about Chicago, Baltimore, and many other cities, which are still hurting today. But a lot of those parents that bought the crack went to jail. Now you're talking about increased divorce rates and one-parent homes. Okay, what you're doing in counseling these individuals is you're restoring that. You're helping them come to grips with the reality of their addiction, and then you're helping them reestablish relationships, possibly with their children, or have a strong relationship with the next person in their life. And by working with just a few, those few work with a few of their own, maybe, or at least one or two more, and it's like a trickle effect. And so, the change that you're perpetuating is an awesome change. It's fantastic, but it's a larger impact than you realize, and I think that's how you change a star, which then can change other stars. I think that's a great idea.
I'm not going to upplay it or downplay it, but I will say that in the ministry world, the prison ministry is the redheaded stepchild, because it has a huge failure rate. Like I can't tell you how many guys that I've spent time with, and they're back in jail, and they're back in their addiction, and it's not rewarding. It's not. It's painful, because you meet people and you spend time with people, and you're praying for those people and you're caring for those people, and then they go right back out, and sometimes they die. I mean, I've had people that I knew who died, from this thing, and it's not the funnest thing in the world, but I guess because I'd been there to some degree, maybe not to the bottom that they've reached, then I have some empathy and sympathy for that. But
Why
yeah.
why do you think that they fail, or why do you think that they lose sight of where they were going?
Relationships. Usually it's relationships. It almost always is.
So another one falls apart and they find
Yeah, something
themselves
falls
up.
apart. Yeah.
And I just wonder how much we were talking about this earlier, and we were saying that both of my parents suffered from addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have three brothers that suffer with addiction. I have one that possibly has drug-induced schizophrenia, drug-induced schizophrenia, and and I've experimented, and I've never felt the urge to continue. I could say to myself, "I'll do this," and I'm done. And it's not. I don't know if it's the lack of a physiological addiction, or if my physiology is different, or if also like if it's I don't want to say willpower, because I don't necessarily subscribe to that, or more of like it's just different.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel, and I've gone through bad relationships. I had one that was really awful, and I had to say to myself, I'm never gonna let that happen to me again. It wasn't, oh man, this stinks, I can't believe it happened, and then I fall back on something. It was, what can I do to make myself more resilient and to put myself in a position where that will never happen to me again, or that if it happened again, I'm not only going to survive it, but I'm going to thrive. And I just wonder how much of that self perspective, that internal locus of control, people can gain, and how much of that would help.
Yeah, I don't know. That's their burden, right? So what we talked about earlier, but that was a neat point that you brought up. It made me think of something that I did want to talk about, like having those barriers. You're setting up a barrier to say, I'm not going to allow that person in to hear, and that's wisdom. I mean, it has to be healthy to say, I'm not allowing that person into my inner circle until I really know them. I'm not going to, and this is a really hard one for people, especially guys. I'm not going to have sex with that woman until I'm married.
Yeah.
I know people that do that. I don't know if I could have done it. But
No.
I'm just saying. I don't know. I thank God I don't have to think about that anymore. But those are tough things to deal with. If you do, you run the risk that you've allowed somebody into a circle that shouldn't be there yet. And that transition has to be carefully thought out. I think about think about this. I think I'm trying to think who said this. I think it was Ravi Zacharias, and maybe he was quoting somebody else. But he said, you got to consider before you tear down a fence why it was put there in the first place.
Oh, yeah.
So the fence that's containing your kid in your yard may be the same fence that's preventing the pit bull from the neighbor's yard from coming over in your yard. Mm-hmm. So we have to be very cautious about who we let into our circles, and cautious about how we utilize our time with those people in the circle. So in other words, if I just spend all my time with my family and I don't have any friends, well, that's not healthy.
Right.
And on the other end of it, if I'm with my friends and I'm never with my family, that's going to be conflict too. So having like a healthy balance, I'm quoting people now, so it's like,
that's okay.
Mr. Miyagi. Balance, Daniel-san.
Yeah. I want to see you slap your hands and just go, real quick, and
that's healing.
No, I think you're right, but I think it's also a willingness to be open-minded and to learn from your mistakes. Mm-hmm. And I think anybody that knows me, they consider me to be stubborn and persistent and challenging. I can be very challenging, quite a bit. And I don't really try to be challenging. I think I'm trying to be open-minded, but logical. And I think that I think that's one thing that people have a hard time with is opening themselves up to all these different realms of possibility. Doesn't mean they have to accept it. It just means that they're open to it, that they're exposing themselves to it, and then learning from your mistakes. Saying that about I don't know. I was talking to that physician yesterday, and one of the things she told me was she walks into a restaurant. All right, Applebee's, because you have to get a reservation for those places. They're pretty hot. But anyway, what she notices right away is people's drinks, in particular alcoholic beverages. And she'll say, "Oh, that person's got a little bit left in this glass or in this bottle. Why aren't they drinking it? It's going to waste. What's wrong with them?" Or I had a drink. How come they're not keeping up with me? Kind of thing. And I said, I never thought about that, and that's got to be a difference. And she said to me, it's funny because when she was going through AA, a lot of people said the same thing.
Now, you didn't say that in the beginning, or I missed it in the beginning that she was a recovered alcoholic.
Yes.
But as soon as you started talking about measuring people's drinks, I was like, she must be an alcoholic.
Did you do that as well?
Of course.
Did you notice?
Yeah,
you did?
I noticed everything. Yeah.
Oh, because he said the
Everything
same
about
thing.
it.
You said that. Okay. You said the same thing.
Yeah,
You're like,
I did.
why aren't you keeping up with me, Ray? Or
Yeah,
why are you
we'd be
sitting
out
there?
like literally. Like I commended Ray recently. Where you remind me where? But because it was with Vinny actually when we sat down with Vinny, he finished his beer. I'd never seen him finish a beer, ever.
Wow.
I'd finished his beers because what do you mean he can't? Like that's didn't even drink the whole first one.
Yeah.
Let alone 2 or 3 or more.
Ludicrous.
We had gone out one time to my favorite bar, and I introduced him to my favorite beer, and he didn't like it, but he could have given it back, and they would have given him something else. But I was like, no, just leave me that. I'll take that one, and whatever. And so now I'm 2 down. He got the next one, liked it a little better, but still didn't finish it. So he leaves. I stay. Next friend comes. And wondering, why is Joe so drunk?
Yeah.
Microbrewery was a little bit, heavier alcohol too. But because I couldn't let him go to waste. I would do that with friends. I wouldn't go around and grab other strangers' left drinks. But I'm sure that people out there do or have. So that is a very common thing, like that I've seen with other people that relate.
But why do you think that is? When I was talking to that physician, I was wondering. I think that's why people also do that with food addictions. They look at someone's plate and they're going, "Oh man, yeah,
It's important to you.
There's people in other parts of the world that are starving.
Yeah.
You've got to finish that, And instead, and usually like somebody that's a little bit healthier, a little bit skinnier, they don't feel the impulse to finish it or to rush themselves to eat it. Or somebody who doesn't have an addiction doesn't feel the impulse to finish the beer, or they may take longer to finish the beer. There's no rush. But I didn't know that this was a common theme among people with addictions, and I just wonder, is that just something that's just innate, or is that something that you kind of just develop?
I think you probably develop it.
I think it's multifactorial as well. Because part of me, why I want to finish, I'll finish everything. By the way, it's not just alcohol. I don't want to let anything I've paid for or I'm buying go to waste.
Oh, I see.
Tell that to my refrigerator and the vegetables, but when it's something easily consumable, it's like, oh man, a soda or a beer or
Were you taught that as a kid? Don't let your food go to waste, kind of thing.
Probably, yeah. I
me
think
too.
so.
Yeah, me too. I taught my kids that. Sorry, guys, but
yeah.
So that's interesting because you guys have a similar outlook to that, and a similar. So when I was a kid, I didn't get fed a lot. I grew up on the other side of the tracks. I grew up in group homes and foster care, and so I don't remember the meals for those places. But living with a parent who can be negligent. And getting food was like a treat. It was like I depended heavily on school lunches. So, as far as like food. So I didn't waste food because that was all I was getting, for the most part. So, but it was never, hey, you better eat all that because, there's starving kids in Africa. It was, I better eat that because I don't know if I'm going to eat later tonight or tomorrow. So it's interesting, and maybe that's part of the reason, but it's interesting to see a common theme there. Mm-hmm. The other thing I wanted to bring up was, we've talked about this before, alcohol has existed for the longest time. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to infringe on anybody's beliefs, but if we think in the concepts of evolution, you evolve to tolerate certain things, or you evolve to adapt. Mm-hmm. We have this adaptability. Well, what's interesting is that right around the time that civilization was transitioning from a nomadic lifestyle to an agricultural lifestyle, settlements, they discovered alcohol. Alcohol's been in our human history for thousands and thousands of years. But when they brewed alcohol, they had alcohol content that was much lower. And you're talking about like 1% to 3%. And wine was probably as high as like 6 to 8%. Now you look at alcohol today, the concentration is so high. And one of the arguments is, if you were nomadic, you had to have alcohol, because alcohol kills everything, and water. If you wanted fresh water to drink, a safe drinking supply, you would have alcohol to drink. Because you never know when you're going to have water, and you never know when you're going to have safe water. As opposed to those that were settling, they would brew alcohol for ritual experiences and religious ceremonies and such. So it's interesting to me to see a difference in our evolutionary history, our human history, per se. And maybe we're just, like anything else, just abusing the food source.
Well, remember now, a lot of drinks have sugar in them, and alcohol itself is like a denatured sugar. And I know you guys probably know way more about that than I do, but I know that it breaks down and it's just like sugar, right? So, and sugar is really addictive, and there's a reason why sugar is addictive. It's because it tastes good. No, I think it's the easiest. You guys also could probably teach me on this, but it's like from biology 101 in college, it's the easiest thing for our bodies to break down is sugar to make energy, right? So sugar's really, that's why it tastes so good, and it's universally good, and you can't find somebody that says sugar is terrible tasting. And so I did this sugar test one time. I'll call it the sugar test. So I wanted to teach my kids about addiction. I wanted them to learn from me what it was, how to identify it, not figure it out on their own, kind of thing. And so I made them a proposal. I said, I will give you each $100 if you'll go 3 days without sugar. And then I think my oldest was maybe 13, which would make my youngest maybe around 10 at the time. And my youngest is a pretty sharp kid, and he says, well, describe the parameters of that. What exactly is this gonna entail? I said, well, okay. I said, I don't really know because I'm also a sugar junkie. I said, but we'll let your mom pick it out because she's much better. I said, but you're just gonna have no sugar for 3 days. $100. I said, I'll give you $100. My oldest son didn't even blink an eye. He said, nope, not interested.
Can't do it. Yeah. It's like,
and then,
that's so hard.
and then Sam was like, well, tell me more. And I tell him a little bit more. And then finally he's like, nah, doesn't sound like a deal. And I was like, wow. I said, so now you see. I said, this is pretty powerful. I said, You guys, for a 13-year-old or a 10-year-old, $100 was, you're a millionaire.
For a 36-year-old.
Yeah, you're a millionaire. Like, I got $100 in the bank. So I said, now you understand addiction. You are addicted to sugar. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not going to have this, it potentially won't have the same ramifications as being addicted to crack cocaine, but I can't see you, out on the park bench trying to get some sugar.
Yeah. No, but
maybe that's just a scarcity thing. I don't know. If it was scarce, maybe you would. I don't know.
Yeah. No.
Who knows what you'd do for a Klondike bar?
No, but you're right though, and that's one of the importance between food science and the food industry is they've discovered the ratio of fat and sugar and how that affects your pleasure portions of of your brain to get you addicted to the food.
Yeah.
So this whole concept, I get irritated a lot with people that talk about willpower and discipline for nutrition to lose weight. And it's not that easy. You know, for a single mother who's raising 3 kids, working 2 or 3 jobs, and she can only afford certain types of food, and that food has been formulated to be more addictive. And therefore, you know, the children want a little bit more, the mother wants a little bit more, or maybe she knows it's not good for them, but the kids are wanting it, and she's got to go to work, and she just caves in and go ahead and get it. So the sugar and the fat ratio, or sugar in and of itself, is far more the most addictive substance in the world. The second most, heroin. The third most, alcohol. And this is what's crazy. Alcohol, which is an illegal drug, it's a legal drug, okay? Whereas heroin is not. Crack is like the 4th or 5th most addictive, cocaine and crack, substance in the world. So alcohol and benzodiazepines, which is another legal drug, are the 2 drugs that you cannot withdraw cold turkey from. They'll
kill you.
They'll kill you.
Yeah.
They'll kill you. You have to be slow. But heroin, cold turkey.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
You can go cold turkey and not die from
You're
a
still
heroin
gonna go
withdrawal.
through
Get
some
real
type of
sick and
DTs.
real uncomfortable.
You get real
but
sick,
you won't
yeah.
die.
You'll
kill you.
feel like you're dying. But alcohol and benzodiazepines, 2 legal drugs. You know, and you know what's not on those substances for addictions? Psychedelics, LSD, DMT, MDA. You know, it's just crazy to me. But that sugar, I don't think I could. I don't think I could do
Exactly.
it.
Yeah, it's hard, right?
Did you do it?
No, no.
I think I could do it. I think I could.
But
I think 3 days. I
But
could
look,
do
it's
that.
a great way to just, you know, to explain to a child
Yeah.
like what addiction is. I hope it really like hit home for them. I hope they, you know, they think about that when they're later in life exposed to those things. You know,
That's a
that's
great
important.
strategy. That's because they'll think back on that. Have you used that with any of your counselees as far as a job?
No, I sort of thought of it as a kid's thing because if you're already addicted to crack cocaine, you know what addiction is.
Yeah.
So that might not be relevant, but yeah.
Do you internalize it though? Like at the time that you are addicted to alcohol or whatever substance it is it internalized within you that you have an addiction?
For
Not
me,
until after the fact,
for me,
right?
not initially. No,
Yeah.
not initially. I remember like people coming up to me and saying stuff like that, like, you know, I think you got a problem. My dad used to go to AA or something. And I was like, I didn't even know what AA was. I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. You're like, no, I'm fine. Leave me alone.
Like, and I was, you know, even though I would have proclaimed to be a Christian at the time, you know, maybe 2 years probably prior to that, I was still an alcoholic and a Christian, which don't really go hand in hand. I tell you, when you accept Christ into your life, and if you believe this sort of thing, there's a spiritual warfare going on, and when you become a Christian, you're not on the enemy's side anymore, and you're an immediate red flag, and you will be attacked personally in every way, and people aren't usually prepared for that. You know,
Sure.
I wasn't. I was told that, and I wasn't prepared for that, and man, was I attacked, and you know, the secret to it is hold the course. You know,
Yeah.
keep doing it, and it'll work out. But yeah.
So you felt like you developed a stronger internal locus of control, like I was talking about earlier. Like you said, I'm going to hold the course. I'm not going to let this stray. I'm not going to let it make me stray. Mm-hmm. And you became a stronger individual through it.
Nobody's going to be... I was talking to a friend about this the other day. It's great. Nobody who hasn't experienced this is ever going to understand it. I prayed to God that he would remove this from me, and it was removed. And I don't understand why people tell me they've prayed and it wasn't removed. I don't understand that. But it was removed. I've had temptation, but I have not had the urge like that I needed to have that. God did that for me. I believe that.
Is that the proof that you were speaking to earlier, as far as like, you know, when you may have been a Christian, but at the time when you were struggling with the addiction, and you discovered God, or you said something more along the lines that it was proved to you. Is this the proof that you're talking about, or was there another example of that? Or you saw him?
It was so long ago when we talked about that.
Yeah.
No, I did. I've never physically seen God. I've never physically heard from God. I have suspicions of doubt of people who say that they have, but
Yeah.
I can't say that they're liars. So I just say, okay, well, that's their experience, and God will reveal Himself to me when in a different way.
But you felt like maybe that was the revealing was you prayed to Him to help you with this addiction, and it worked.
Did that reveal God to me?
Yeah.
No.
In a sense. No.
No.
Okay.
No. I can talk about that experience. I love that experience because it was something else. But you want me to allude?
Yeah.
No.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah.
Love to hear it.
I love this story. So I was an atheist / agnostic, which means I don't believe that there is a God, right? Or if I'm an agnostic, for maybe the audience that doesn't know, I don't think that can really determine. I just don't have enough evidence, or I'm not smart enough to determine whether there is or isn't a God. And I grew up with my grandfather taking me to church, and I saw the value in the relationships and the personal values. So I wanted that for my children. And my wife is a Christian, and I kind of came to the conclusion, although this isn't how you should come to it. I said, if she's pursuing that and I'm not somehow with her with that, we'll be divorced.
Oh. Okay.
So I said, you know what? I love the healthy portion of what church offers. There's nothing bad about it, right? Nothing bad about it, really. And I said, I want my kids to grow up in that. I want my kids to have that belief because I know there's value in that belief. So we went to church, right? And we listened to music, and I'd read the Bible. I probably may have read the Bible more then than I do now. And the day came when I started to really analyze my thought patterns, and I said, I was going to church and I was going, you know what? And I'm questioning God, and I'm saying, this can't be real. Like, and I said, Joe, just for today, just not even the whole day. I'm gonna deny the thoughts in my head that God doesn't exist between here and going to church. And that's a pretty short drive. I mean, that was only like 5 miles. The bombardment in my own mind was not my own bombardment. Like, I was asked, every time I'd ask a question in my mind, I would shoot it down and go, no, I'm not thinking about that. And I could not shut it off. And it seemed external. And by the time I got to the church, I was like, wow, that was crazy. There's a lot going on in my head. And I thought, well, okay, I made it here. I didn't really discount anything. And then I went up and sat in the church. I did not hear a thing that went on in that church, but I looked at this one man the whole time. He was a patient of my wife's, and she told me a story about how he was an evangelical. He was an author, and he had been a brothel owner in, I think, up in New Jersey, and almost went down in a RICO stat thing, and was just an awful person, but had changed his life. And church ended, and I physically felt a push in my eardrum, on my right ear, to follow that guy. I can't explain it. It wasn't like I had a head cold or anything. And that was the start. I met this guy, and we talked, and he sat down and spent time with me to answer the questions of doubt. And ever since then, I've believed. But again, that's what I say. Once you start believing, you become a soldier against the enemy, and you become a target. And you either start following the guidelines of the Christianity that you just proclaimed you believe in, mm-hmm. or you're going to be attacked. You're going to be easily picked off. So, yeah.
Huh. Okay. And, well, I don't know. That sounds great. And it sounds like your wife was that candle that, mm-hmm. You talk about in Christianity, you talk about being the light in the world, mm-hmm. especially in the darkness. And she led you out of that and into something that, is better for you. Okay. I don't know what else to say to that. That was an awesome story, actually.
Thank you.
I like it. Do you still, are you still in contact with that gentleman?
From time to time, we'll touch base with one another.
That's cool.
Yeah, he definitely taught me a lot of stuff about how to minister to people and things like that. because that's his thing, sort of, And I still keep in contact with him
That's
from time
awesome.
to time.
What about you? You got anything like that?
So I've got an interesting encounter, I'll call it.
UFO?
Almost.
UAP?
Yeah. Yeah. It came from above. And this is kind of this is a classic. This is a classic story. Some of my closest friends know this story because they were there. But I grew up in a church, in a Christian church. And when I was it had to be high school, like early high school, our church participated in a basketball tournament. So we got a group of guys from the church and their friends to band a basketball team together and travel to Kissimmee to the Florida statewide Christian basketball tournament. And I got a few of my friends to come along, and we wanted and thought this is a great time to bring some booze into the event. So we brought, and this really was like, it must have been in my first, and like it was obviously in my early drinking years because I was in high school. And so I was 16, 17 years old. We took a big bottle of wine that I think my friend stole from his job. And then with the other one, I don't know where we bought it, but a bottle of Aftershock. And we drive up in a van with the other kids and guys that were chaperoning. And we stopped at a mall to go to the bathroom, get some food, and we popped the cork on the bottle of wine. I think we did it actually before we stopped. So we drank this bottle in the back of the bus. We didn't have a cork or a bottle opener, so we had to like try to dig this cork out. So we got cork mess all over the back of the bus. We drank that on the trip, or on that right there. We threw the bottle away when we got off the bus at the mall. Later that evening, we busted out the liqueur and we drank it and got pretty unruly. Remember, like, my friend was a hockey player. He's body checking the soda machine out by the pool. And I mean, we're clearly drunk. One of the chaperones knew.
He did a great job.
Kind of turned the other way, kind of turned his head the other way.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. One of the other kids eventually told one of the other chaperones. And so then it became aware to us by the end of the tournament. First of all, we lost terribly. Couldn't play worth a damn. I couldn't anyway.
Well, not if you're body checking a soda machine.
Yeah.
That's a different sport.
So it became aware that, okay, we're caught. We're busted. How could we not be? And I'm going through like, okay, what do I need to do to minimize the damage here and hopefully not let this get back to my parents. I got to talk to Bob, the other chaperone that now knows, and I'm going through what I'm going to say. And we're riding, and this is on the bus ride home. And I'm thinking like, okay, here's how I'm going to approach him. I'm going to tell him, first thing, Bob, we need to talk.
You're like 16, right?
Yeah, 16, 17.
I'm just,
16.
I'm imagining what this conversation's like with a kid. Go ahead.
So, and that's about as far, I think, right at that moment, as I'm thinking how I'm going to approach Bob and say that we need to talk, we pass a big billboard, a big black billboard with big white letters that said, we need to talk. And at the bottom was dash God. And I'm like, oh my God. That's literally what I was just thinking. Here's this sign. This is from God. Okay. I don't remember what I thought after that. I was just shocked. I was amazed. I was like, that's incredible. That's crazy. The coincidence that would just pop up on the side of the road while I'm thinking that in my head. So we got back. I didn't go up to Bob, and almost immediately my parents came over and they, the whole thing, it was blown. So got in trouble. But that moment, I just remember like, man, that was crazy. That was really crazy. Now that was obviously the very beginning of my drinking career. So things drifted further away from church and from God and into agnostic and, or atheistic thoughts and behavior. And until eventually I came to the point where, everything had fallen apart or wasn't working, and I had to start to do something else or do something again and find find that relationship with a higher power and start to do and work towards that. And one of the biggest lines I think that was able to bring me back towards a more spiritual lifestyle is that because I was investing into all of my perceived negative thoughts about church and religion of any kind and organizations that were running religion. And the line that I read that brought me back said, "Be quick to notice where religion got it right." I'm like, oh, well, of course there's a lot of good to come out of religion and a lot of positives there. That's where we need to spend the time. That's where we need to make the investment. And that's where we need to focus on is where's the good, because there's always going to be bad things to come along with anything, especially the more people involved. But so I was able to use that to start, living more of a lifestyle of that on that good side and start to trust in God and trust in just something other than myself to help carry that burden that we talked about earlier. And like Brian said, that took a lot, that obsession, that impulse, or that desire that pushes you so strongly to make that next drink, to take that next drink, because that was a really, really hard part about the separation from the alcohol, is that I still wanted it a lot badly. And in all the times you had asked him earlier if he kind of knew or was aware, or if we were aware or thought about, like, are we alcoholic, or do we have a problem, or is this a problem, or being aware of that obsession, or that, like, why can't we let people not finish their drinks? Mm-hmm. I had become aware of that for a long time. And I wasn't okay with it. I didn't like it. I didn't like that I was aware that, hey, I shouldn't really be drinking as much as I do. I shouldn't be acting the way I'm acting. I shouldn't be, doing this. So I was guilty. And it got to the point where I would even hide or try to hide my drinking from somebody or something in a time that it really didn't even need to be hidden. So now I'm thinking, like, why am I trying to go out of my way to hide this when I don't need to? That's when it really started to look to me like this is a problem. So
evil isolates.
Yeah. So I had taken numbers and from commercials like, do you need help? Do you think you have a problem? Call this number. Here's a treatment center. Here's a counselor. I've got all these numbers saved in my phone. Still, even today, I never called any of them. Never reached out. Never hit that spot where I needed to reach out and get the help that I wanted and that I needed. And I don't know why it just took that rock bottom, I guess, which is different for everybody, to come to the realization that I needed the help, or the desire to reach out and get it, and the willingness, I think, to reach out and take that. And even just making that first, like, coming to that, knowing that I should stop, and then finding the willingness to stop was kind of two different things. Mm-hmm. But as soon as I kind of came to that decision, like, okay, things are now finally bad enough, and I've stacked the odds up against me tall enough that if I don't turn around right now, everything's going to fall apart. My whole life is going to be an even worse disaster. So for me, I guess my rock bottom potentially could be said, because it certainly couldn't have gotten worse, but I didn't want it to get worse. I knew if it got any worse, I was in trouble that it might get too hard. It might be too hard to come back from. So that's when I reached out. That's when I reached out to Brian's wife, and she connected me with Brian, and we went from there. Just sitting down and making that first conversation was so difficult, but also necessary at the same time. But as soon as I opened up and shared and admitted that I was struggling, that made the next step easier. And every time a I laid my vulnerability out there, I think it made the next step easier, because it's part of the acceptance of the change of lifestyle and behaviors, was just hitting that point. So that's a big part of it. And the other side of it that we talked about with the relationship with God and or a higher power is finding the willingness to believe in that or believe in something. And I think another one of the lines or one of the ideas or suggestions was that if you're struggling to believe yourself, but you know somebody over here who's had success does believe in God or a higher power or the solution that he's found, he believes that that's work, that is real and is working and helped. Do you believe that he believes that was working? And if you can believe that he believes, go with that. Start with that. And then work on your own beliefs and faith and steps. So those two things, seeing where religion got it right,
Mm-hmm.
and focusing on that and practicing that, and seeing other people that believed more than I did to kind of help me along, help me get into it or walk the walk.
And you feel like that's necessary? You feel like you have to go over that approach?
Which approach?
The approach that there's a higher power?
I think that everybody,
Or you think it just helps?
it helps
Does it just
greatly.
help, or is it necessary? That's the question.
That's a tough question. I think it helps more often than not. I
Brian,
think in most cases
what do you
it's
think?
I've never seen anybody successful. I'm going to measure success in sobriety as 2 years of sobriety. That's how I do it. I don't know. There's no real formula to say you're successfully sober now, you've
Right.
graduated. But the statistics show that if you've had 2 years of sobriety, and that your chances of staying sober for the rest of your life is pretty darn great. So I'm going to say that's a measure of success. Another measure of success is 30 days, because if you can do 30 days, you're physically non-addicted to that. So, yeah, I'd say that that's. I have not seen anybody reach that stage without having some spiritual
Okay.
belief.
Okay.
So that's my personal evidence.
Sure.
that's kind of where a lot of some of the newer studies are coming from as well, with the people using the hallucinogens to have a spiritual experience,
Mm-hmm.
to change their psychological or their to change their perspective. Really, I don't know how far or how like I've only heard a few of the people that are talking about it say that some people do maybe a few, maybe like three times. They'll have this this hallucinogen or this drug or this trip, and then they're done and they're all better, or they're on their way anyway. Other people I've heard them talk about somebody doing just once, and that was enough. They said, "Holy cow!" It became all so much different. That psychological change that they didn't need anymore. They didn't come back. They're like, nope, good. 10 years later, still sober,
Mm-hmm.
still doing, still thriving.
Even a bad trip, but it's not necessarily because of an acknowledgement of a higher power. It's because of a dissolving of the ego and a reconnection into a higher consciousness, you could say, or a connection between life. A lot of them talk about how they themselves dissolve and they realize that they're a part of everything and everyone. And it's comforting because you aren't alone. You're a part of everything. And it's the same thing with, like, you're talking about, you know, you're facing death. Death is knocking at your door, and you have psilocybin, or you take DMT, and it's a comforting because you realize that you're a part of everything and that you are not necessarily by yourself. And there is no necessarily an endpoint, if you would. But certainly some with like DMT, they do describe most of the time they describe an interaction with entities, and those entities are similar in nature from case to case.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's a higher power, who knows? But that entity helps them realize to break down the construct of themselves, and they get over themselves, over their ego, and realize the connection they have with everything else.
I would say I think that like an awakening, in the case of the people who have felt like they finally blended into a part of everything. That's kind of like an awakening to the rest of the world, to the rest of the universe, to the rest of existence. And a lot of times we'll say a lot of the terms we use just kind of, I think or make it easier. Like when we talk about God, some people just call their higher power God because God is an easy way to identify whatever their higher power is, especially if they don't even know what it is. But a spiritual, the word spiritual, I think often gets grouped into the religious side of things. And it can be, obviously, certainly can be, but it can also be almost, I don't want to say detached, but somewhat separated from from religion into just a mindset, or lifestyle, but like that spiritual awakening, coming to a different awareness of what else is around you, what else is out there. Like and in my opinion, in my thought, to become more one with the universe and or everything in existence is like a spiritual awakening to a higher power. Like that everything universe thing around you would become your higher power.
It's
And
enlightenment.
enlightenment, yeah.
It's achieving some form of enlightenment, whether it's through Christianity or through meditation or through Hinduism. Um, and of course, though, you have religions that are rooted in that this is, through the way through enlightenment is really through Christ. The way through enlightenment is through Allah. The way through enlightenment is such and such. But that's what it is. It's that spiritual awakening that you're talking about is like a form of enlightenment. In which case, you lose the selfish perspective and you gain insight into something that's bigger than you, and in that, in essence, comforts you to make the next step or to help you overcome something, right? But this goes back to the concept, there's archaeological evidence now that we have that humans have been lacing alcoholic beverages, whether it be beer or wine, with hallucinogens, mushrooms predominantly. This is why Santa Claus has a red and white robe with a green pine tree. The idea that religious and ritualistic practices utilize alcohol with hallucinogens to basically facilitate the enlightenment of that experience.
You're talking about pagans?
No, even within Christianity.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've found archaeological evidence within.
So Christianity only goes back 2,000 years, right? So, and there's subsects of Christianity in every religion that do things under the quote unquote Christian or quote unquote Muslim that aren't really biblical.
Right. Well, I mean, if we go back to the time of, go back to Judaism, there's archaeological evidence that, people of Judaic practice, the Jews, were using hallucinogenic substances in supplementation with alcohol or in of itself. It was just part of the ritualistic experience. They would do other things that were not using alcohol and drugs. They would do sleep deprivation. They would do fasting as well. Things that can lead to hallucinations or to a state of exhaustion or a state of altered being, if you would. And they would have visions, and they would have a different perspective. They would achieve a form of spiritual enlightenment. But then you fast forward into Christianity, you see references from archaeological texts and also from clay pots, pottery, and whatnot. You see that wine has been laced with hallucinogens for religious and ritual experiences. And then you look at that in comparison to other religions, and the same thing holds true. You have a lot of archaeological evidence that is coming out most recently to link Israel, Greek, and Roman empires together with alcohol and hallucinogens, and then of course sleep deprivation, fasting, um, things to that experience to achieve a higher state. The Mayans did it as well. So did the Incans. They did things that were very similar in that nature to celebrate a festival that carried on for 7 days versus 13 days, or to achieve a religious experience. The Hopi Indians did it with peyote. Or throughout all the populations of the world, there has been some experimentation with hallucinogens and alcohol, also with other means of achieving a spiritual enlightenment. Sweat lodges is one of them as well. But the point is that, to your point, is that enlightened experience, that experience of spiritual awakening or enlightenment, helps comfort you for whatever you're going to achieve, but also can help you overcome an obstacle or develop a sense of resilience for whatever it is that you're doing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like it gives you, as I mentioned earlier, just something to help deload your struggles with, and sometimes just enough to put you at peace for the day, for the hour, whatever it is, it can be a shorter or longer amount of time, but being able to find a sense of peace or find it and goes a long way.
Yeah. A lot of your myths talk about this stuff too. A hero goes on a quest and they've got to achieve something of extreme difficulty. They have to overcome a task, and they utilize a substance or a technique to overcome that. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to the whole religious experiences. That's not to say that one is better than the other, or one is wrong or not. That really, in my perspective, as a person I don't perceive that. Maybe I haven't internalized an addiction. I'm open to that idea, but I don't seem to have an addiction to anything at this time. But that's, to that point, I can see the benefit and the use of finding a higher power and a higher calling to allow you to overcome something that is otherwise extremely challenging.
Yeah, and I'll say that Christianity, I think, is unique in that it has a relational part in it that other religions don't have. So I believe that God desires to be in relationship with all of us. He wants that for all of us, and I really didn't understand, and I can't. I don't want to make this sound like no one can understand this. Until I had children, I did not understand how God's relationship is to me until I had that relationship with somebody else. Somebody much smarter than me could probably figure that out, but I did not really understand that until I had children and when they got to actually kind of being people, because for first 2 years they're just crying and pooping and whatever.
All over the floor.
right. But it's kind of like, and I heard a guy say this one time, and I was like, yeah, I think it's Donald Miller. He says, so God wants to be in relationship with you. And he says, and he sits down, it's like he's got this big giant box of crayons, and he's got this big, like a butcher sheet of paper, and he says, let's sit down and draw something. Let's create something. See, because we think that God has this path for us, and you can believe whatever you want, and I may be wrong, that God has this specific path in my life. And sometimes I think people, especially in Christianity, use that as an excuse, right? God doesn't, obviously God doesn't want that for me. There are times in history where God had a specific purpose for a specific person in a specific moment. Say Mary needed to be the mother of Jesus, but for the most part, God's like, hey, what do you want to draw, And then Donald Miller says, well, I told him I wanted to be a photographer at Mardi Gras. And he's like, no. It has to be a good picture. It has to be in the guidelines of what we believe. but what do you want to draw? What do you want to do with your life? Having that perspective has really changed how I've thought about things, we can decide to be drug addicts, and we can decide to have those relationships, and we can decide to go to jail. These are all the courses of the decisions that we make, or we can draw another picture. And there's going to be struggles along the way. There's going to be broken crayons. You're not going to have the color you wanted. But you may never succeed in finishing the picture, if but it's the journey, right? And God, in my belief, and in the Christian belief, I'd say, not that I speak for all Christians, but he wants to be in relationship with me. He wants to be in relationship with you, and he wants to be in relationship with you, and he's chasing after you. It's just you have to be willing and open-minded to be open to it.
Kind of like that toddler who's running straight. You think they're going to run straight, and they take a left, and they go right between your legs, and they're covered in grease, right? So then they just slip by. No, I think that's beautiful in that sense, and I understand where you're coming from, because I've talked about this so many times. It's really hard to tell somebody how much you love your children. It's really hard to tell your children how much you love them, because they haven't experienced what you've experienced. And this is coming from a guy, like I said, I didn't want children. I didn't want to get married. I told my wife at the time, I'm just going to Charlie Sheen around. This is when Charlie Sheen was cool and wasn't crazy.
He was always crazy.
It wasn't tiger blood at that point. But I just wanted to work enough to travel the world and play around. I wanted to be a guy, but. When we had our first child, I can't explain it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I tried to my best ability, but I knew I was going to love my kid regardless. But it was like somebody literally picked the veil off my eyes, and my life turned. It made a 180-degree turn, and I felt instantly in love with my child. Mm-hmm. Instantly. Yeah. And I can't explain that. It's very difficult. This is the best way I can
you don't
explain
have
it.
To me.
Yeah, you get it,
I
right?
totally get it.
You get it. And you want nothing but the best from your child. You want them to develop that autonomy, that independence, without necessarily going through major mistakes and suffering. But you can't. Mm-hmm. You can't go through that. So they have to make mistakes. They have to suffer a little bit in order for them to learn how to be independent and make good decisions. But it's so hard to put into words how much you love that child, and how much you want to be with them. It's really difficult. And so what you're saying, it makes complete sense. Mm-hmm. And then that little person, they don't get it. They're like, just get off me, leave me alone, and they run away from you. But they don't, or they let me make my own choices, and let me do this and this. And you have to step aside to let them make that choice, but you at the same time you're like, maybe don't go left, go right. It's tough. Yeah. But drawing a picture, you want them to draw this, or do this way because it's going to help them, but they've got to figure it out, and they don't know how much you love them like that, and and eventually they figure it out. When they get older, maybe if they have a child, or maybe they spend some time without you, they kind of figure that out. But that's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah, thank you.
I can't speak to that enough. But I did want to say, what do you think of the concept of free will? This is a really complicated. I'm going to kind of trap you in this one.
This is deep. This is the deepest conversation we could have.
Yeah, I want to go into. So there's a lot of people that talk about this, and I'll mainly say, I listen to Sam Harris, who doesn't necessarily agree with the concept of free will, and a lot of philosophers don't, and some scientists. But the idea of you have this butcher block of paper with crayons, and God being omnipotent, right? Especially in Christianity, He knows your choices beforehand. He knows your path beforehand. So is that really free will?
Yeah, that's so funny, because I'll be honest, I'm a little nervous about coming here first talking, because I'm not a big talker anyway. You probably don't believe that, but I'm not. And so I asked a friend. I was like, hey, let's have just listen through the things I want to talk about. Tell me if you think it's kind of on the same page, is what you think. He's like, yeah, yeah. And then we got, like you guys sometimes do. We went down a rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
And we start talking about this very subject.
Oh,
And
okay.
and it was cool because he had a little different perspective than I did, and I've kind of like, okay, that does shine some light on that. He said, and it really shined light on it. God is not in this time or any time. He's in everything at once. He can be in things separately. He said that to try to wrap your head around that, you'll never be able to do it.
Sure.
It's like, thanks for this most simple answer to the most complicated question ever. We just won't be able to understand that. Like, it's not within our capability. We can't be outside of time. We're stuck in this time zone, right? We're here.
But that's where I get confused, because in the Bible it talks about free will and choice,
You do.
and making the choice to. I mean, the Christian means to Christ-like, right? Be like Christ. And the essence, I think Christ probably would have been the biggest Democrat. He would have been giving money to the poor, but all the good things, right? But the idea is that if it's already laid out, if there's already like a program, okay, of your life, and he or she knows exactly where you're going and what choices you're going to make, even though you may have 2 or 3 different choices, but they know exactly what you're going to choose, and they knew it before they even created you, then is that really free will?
Yeah, that's a tough question.
Yeah, that's a very hard.
I think people have been debating this for years.
Sure.
In my personal opinion, because I think God can step outside of anything. God at one point stepped inside of a human, right? We know that through Christ's life and sacrifice. He put himself into the human condition and human suffering and had relationships. And I watched it's a little bit off subject, but I'll get back there. I watched like a great show. I think it was called Chosen. I don't remember. It was a little. Anyway, it was about the life of Jesus and the apostles and it showed this relationship of them joking and laughing, and I was like, I never really thought of it like that. Like, he was there doing relationship. This was the Creator loved us so much that he is willing to be in relation in a physical form. And so, yeah, back to your question.
That's a tough question.
I don't think it can be ever answered in this
Yeah.
in this lifetime.
Yeah,
No,
it's
I just
something that
don't.
maybe.
But I do believe we have free will. Like,
Okay.
I do believe that. I think maybe it's kind of like I'm making the movie, but God can watch the movie afterwards.
Right. It's a good.
And he can tell what the ending was, but I created the ending.
Right.
Yeah, it's
It,
tough.
it leads to a question. Like a lot of people say, well, why suffering? Why make mistakes? And people say, well, because God gave you free will. And you're like, well, yeah, but he's omnipotent. He knows that there's going to be suffering. He knew Hitler was going to do what Hitler did, and he created them anyway. And a great story that I heard, and I'm probably going to butcher it, of Christ in the Spanish Inquisition. Have you ever heard about this? So it's beautiful. So there's a priest. Okay, they're in the Spanish Inquisition. And this is fictional, right? So the priest provides his people of the town with all the food they need, clothing, work, everything, shelter, everything they could possibly, need. And the only requirement is for them to come to church and to abide by the priest's rules and his worship of God. And he's the conduit of God to people. So he's very powerful, in this may say.
Sounds like Moses. Continue.
Yeah, pretty much, right? So it doesn't have a Moses-like ending, though. So the people are doing that. And then one day, Christ appears and in the church. He shows up in the church. And the people are aghast. And the priest sees him immediately and has him detained and put into a dungeon below the castle and hidden from the people, and say, oh, it's a hoax and whatnot, blah, blah, blah. So the people go back out to the fields, to farm and whatnot, and have their possessions and still abide by the rules of the priest. And the priest at this point pursues to beat him, torture him, similar to that of the crucifixion. And he approaches Christ and he says, what are you doing here? I've got everything under control. They have everything they possibly need. Why do you think they would need you? Okay? And he doesn't answer. And this infuriates the priest. And he said, he tortures him a little bit more. And he says to Christ, he says, do you really think that people want to suffer? That do you think people want to go without? Do you really think people want to make mistakes if you can provide them with every little need of their own? Okay? That's what I provide. And he says to Christ, he says to him, I will let you go, but if you ever show up here again, I will crucify you a second time. And so he unchains him, and Christ approaches the priest, kisses him on the cheek, hugs him, and leaves. And the point of this tale was that without suffering and without mistakes, you can't learn to have free will. You don't have free will if you are given everything you need, right?
Right.
So would you rather be free to make the choices that you can make, in which case you will have suffering, or you will have mistakes and error? Or would you rather have a life that's contained, a life of no freedom, but given everything that you could possibly have? And that's the lesson. And I always think of that story as a beautiful lesson, and the fact that, from my perspective, if I'm thinking about Daniel Boone probably wants absolute freedom. It goes back to, like, you can use it in many different instances. You can use it as far as, like, the country's concerned. The frontiersmen went out into the frontier with absolute freedom, knowing the risks that they take with the Native Americans, with disease, with lack of food and lack of water.
We
Right.
struggle with that question today in our own politics, right?
Yeah.
How much do I want the government to control, right? Like,
Right.
the closer it gets to communists, the more control they have. And is it better? I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you, to like wrap it back around, the war on drugs. That's a policy developed by the government that restricts your freedom in choosing what you can and cannot have. People have always used drugs, always, throughout human history. The question becomes, well, if that's the case, can you really prevent people from using it? Or maybe you'll help people a little bit more by not telling them they can't do something. It's like that child. Don't go do that. Don't push that red button.
Now I want to.
You can't do that. And now they're like, that's that. I've got to go try it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it just makes you curious. What if we just said, let's end the war on drugs? Cartels would probably collapse, like the prohibition. People would be free to make their own choices. And there'd probably be a rough point there for a little bit. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But I know that for myself, I would want more freedom and less regulation to make those choices as opposed to somebody else.
Agreed.
Yeah. What do you think? You're in thought over there. You're like,
I've never heard you share that story before.
It's a beautiful story, though, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. Like we said at the beginning, this is a deep
It's a deep story.
subject, deep concept.
What makes that interesting is that the priest threatens him, and he chooses to kiss the priest, hug the priest, and walk away. Now, there's certain versions of that story where he whispers in the priest's ear, I love you, always and forever, which shows you that the priest himself has freedom of, freedom of choice. Well, but he does that as a way to remind the priest of who he is, and despite his flaws, he still loves him as a son, and he can be forgiven. He doesn't walk away choosing the alternative that the priest gave him. He walks away and showing the example of the difference between ultimate freedom and limited freedom. Yeah. That's the whole point of the presence. It's not to show up and free everybody. It's to show those two caveats and also let the priest know that, he's still a son of God. He is not God. But it's a very deep story, a very deep tale. But I thought it was cool. And I thought it was cool the way you said it with, it reminded me when you talked about your children.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same idea.
To go back to boundaries, another boundary is your time, right? And what you've committed to, and kind of, I don't know why it popped into my head, but there's a story in the Bible about Jesus, and I think you find it in like two of the Gospels, like Matthew and Luke, told two different ways because of two different authors. But he's called by someone to come to a town and to heal their daughter, I believe it was. It's funny because sometimes I have these guys that I work with, they know the Bible way more than I do. I mean, they've actually read it from front to back because they've got a lot of extra time.
That's me right here.
I mean, when you're just sitting there in a cell, you have a lot of extra time, right?
Yeah.
And they can quote it, but they have a lot of hard time living it. But so forgive me if I'm not really like, that is from Matthew 22.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
No.
Or if I mix the names up, but I'll get the story right.
Right.
And the point of the story, and not the obvious point of the story, because that's what makes it interesting. So he's asked to come heal this daughter. I think she had already died, or she was in the process of dying. So he travels to do this. And he's going into the town, and this is gonna be mind blowing. Okay, so he's going into the town. So he shows up. He's got his entourage, right, and people come to see him. They are flocking to him at this point. He's full blown ministry. He's and they're there for a reason, right? They're there for a reason. They want to either be part of a miracle, they want to be healed, or they want to see a miracle, because this guy's performing miracles. They're seeing things that has never happened before, and the religious people of the time, they're flocking to it. So everybody's coming because they want something from him. And if he was to try to heal everybody who was sick right there, then and there, he'd still be on this earth, because people would keep coming, and he'd be on Facebook healing people, and
Right,
it would
right.
never end. It would
Right.
never end. But being a steward of his time on earth, which was short, he's like, I'm going to heal this person. And there's people that day that didn't get healed. That's the reality, right? That's kind of weird. You think of Jesus as like the Democrat, the guy that's would do for
Right.
everybody.
Right.
But no, he was also a human, and had a defined amount of time on this earth, and he had made a commitment to do something. And he didn't let these other distractions get to him as he pushed through that crowd to get to this person that he was called to go do, right? So we can use that same example in our own lives. I mean, if we tell an employer, hey, I'm going to be here at 8 o'clock on Monday. Mm-hmm. Well, the alarm didn't go off, or my girlfriend called and she needed, those things happen. But they don't happen, 3 days a week. Right? So we got to be, a man of our word. And then along the way, a woman grabs his cloak, because she's suffered for, I think it says 15 years, 15 years. And she believed so strongly that Christ could heal her, that just touching, if she could just touch his garment, that would heal her. And he notices that in a crowd of people. He says, who touched my garment? Who was that? Right? Which is pretty cool too. No point to that point other than it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever read any of the Gnostic books?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you ever read Reuben or the Book of Judas?
I've read the Book of Judas.
What do you think about that story?
I don't know. I think what makes the Bible a proven antiquity is the different points from which it comes. It was kind of like the early form of blockchain.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, okay, I got this book.
Story on story on story.
And you're going to write it, you're going to copy it, and you're going to copy it, because we didn't have Xerox. We didn't have a way of scanning it. And then he's going to copy your copy. And that's how it got out, right? By hand writing it. But they've found and continue to find copies of the Bible that are, and the Bible, if you don't know this, I'm sure you guys do, but it's just a collection of different books, right?
That's right.
So, but these collections were, verified by other books. So we hope that the ones that are like Judas are not, obviously at some point scholars decided that they were verifiable or they weren't. I just as when I transitioned to being a Christian, I had to let go of my pride.
Mm-hmm.
I had to stop thinking. It was funny because I was listening to one of your podcasts.
Yeah.
And my wife has told me this before. She says, "You're just like Raymond." And then I'm listening to your podcast and I go, that's exactly how I feel. Like, I need to know the information. I need to know the details. Yeah. I need to know everything about it to formulate an understanding. And if I ask you a question and you don't tell me I don't know, if you say, okay, well, this is what you should do, then I expect you to be able to defend that position.
Right.
And explain why you came up with that.
Right.
That's not, and in my mind, that's not me being argumentative. I'm just seeking the truth, right?
Thank you. That's
I know.
exactly right. Yeah.
But the problem with that is, and what life has taught me is we're pretty unique in that way. Most people aren't like that. And we're not, we have to do relationship with people. So sometimes we just have to let go of our pride on things. And that's kind of how the Bible was for me. Like there's things.
But is it pride? Because I think of it more as you think for yourself.
Yeah.
And you're not looking for a quick answer. You're not looking for the simplistic or reductionist view. You're not looking at it just because I said so. You're looking at, like you said, you want to understand the truth. And if somebody says, I don't know, that's good enough.
Right.
The problem is people are not very good at saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
They want to give you the BS.
Yeah.
And you're quick to see past that because you're asking why.
Right.
And that's the number one, or has been claimed to be the number one reason or aspect of a leader or somebody who thinks for themselves is they want to know why. And it's not necessarily why as to like it has to be this way, it has to be that way.
Right.
It's a why that leads you to thinking for yourself, and you can almost theorize and conceptualize other things that branch out from that. But you're looking to know that little detail that helps you understand why people think this way, that way, or why we're pointing that way.
So
And I think
we are never going to really understand God.
That I agree.
We are on
I
an
think,
ant's level to him. So we are never going to get the full picture.
Yeah.
If you're willing to put your pride aside and say, I'm not going to get the full picture, but I'm still going to believe.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I said, I'm not going to get the full picture, but I've seen enough evidence that I believe.
And that's huge. That's like a gigantic hurdle.
Yeah, that's a leap, man.
And that's great that you're able.
But that is what it is about. It is a leap of faith. And again, some people get, they say they hear from God, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
The guy that I do the ministry with, he was in prison. He was in solitude for 2 straight years.
Oh, jeez.
That's torture.
Yeah, it is torture.
That's torture. All he was given was his Bible, his food, and whatever hair care products he needed, because he's Italian. He's got a nice head of hair. I hope you're listening, Chris.
One of those.
I hope you're listening. But no, and he wouldn't mind me telling you that he audibly hears from God. And this is a guy that I really, really respect and love, and he's a brother of mine. You know what I mean? A best friend, and would trust him with anything. But it's hard for me to conceptualize.
But people have said that throughout humanity that they've heard the voice of God,
and they've manipulated it too.
Some have, some haven't. And others use it as a springboard to help others. But the reason why I bring up the book of Saint Reuben, and the book of Judas is, I think the book of Judas, although hasn't really been authenticated as within the timeline as the rest of the canon for the New Testament, because it comes much later, and that may be because they just don't have an older source that they haven't found yet, or maybe it was just created a later date by another person. But the idea of the book of Judas is that, and this is beautiful, within the Christian Bible of the New Testament, the discussion of Judas is that Judas purposely betrays Christ for, was it 20 pieces of silver? 30 pieces of silver. He has 2 different deaths in the Christian Bible. One is by hanging, I believe, and one is by stone, right? Being stoned to death, right?
I thought he just hung himself.
Yeah, there's 2 different versions.
And then they cut his
entrails.
gullet, and he bled onto the ground.
One of them is also, I think, a stoning. They stoned the people of the town, stoned him. But the hanging is him feeling guilty for the betrayal of Christ, and he hangs himself, and they cut him. Well, in the book of Judas, though, it has it a little differently. It has it that Christ goes to Judas and asks him to betray him, turn him over to the Romans. Because if he does not, then the crucifixion can never happen. It can never happen. He'll never be a sacrificial lamb. Mm-hmm. Okay? And Judas is reluctant at first. He loves Christ. And this is why I think it's a romantic story. It's not about somebody betraying him for money. It's about an apostle turning him over to complete the mission that Christ was intended for, that he came to understand as a child, right? Or since the inception of his birth, or however long you want to say. So Judas is reluctant. Christ shares with him some lessons of the kingdom of heaven, and convinces him to turn him over to the Romans. So he does, and he does it knowing that he'll be ostracized from the rest of the Christians, from the other apostles, and that he will also suffer a gruesome death, and that in that very act, he's showing his allegiance and his love to Christ, which had to happen. He had to be crucified. He had to be crucified.
Why do you think he had to be crucified?
In order to be the sacrificial lamb, to be for people, the sons of man, sons of God, I should say, to be forgiven.
So a lot of the Old Testament,
that's the testament.
a lot of the Old Testament leading up to the New Testament is a lot of prophecy about the Messiah. And you're right. That's why why it needed to be done, because this was the prophecy. But it didn't need to be. I don't know if I believe that it needed to be. The hands needed to be forced. I don't know.
No, I
it's
wonder.
Interesting.
It makes you think about, would it have carried out that way? Because is it Paul, I believe, when the Romans came to arrest Christ, Paul chopped the ear off of one of the soldiers and went to fight them, and Christ told them to lay down his arms?
It was John.
It was John?
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, John was the denier as well.
Yeah.
The one with the temper.
Yeah. So he had to say, let it be, let it be. But the point is that without that, you don't have the sacrificial lamb. And I think it's romantic in the sense that, and I want to firmly agree with that, because it points Judas not as the betrayer, not as somebody who is evil, but somebody that is doing what his God told him to do. And in essence, he is also a sacrificial lamb, if you think about it from that context. So there's no evil with that. It's just the way it had to be. And the reason why I bring that up, and we bring up the book of St. Reuben, is that the book of St. Reuben, for those that aren't familiar, is that Reuben was an archangel. Christ is born. So you go in the Bible, you go from his birth to he's 30 years old. So there's that 30 years missing, okay? And there's a lot of speculation. The book of St. Reuben was written as a way to help explain that. He's growing up, he's going through adolescence, and he's developing into a man, so to speak. And he's starting to understand that he's got these special gifts, these abilities, if you will, where he can do extraordinary things that other people cannot. And in the book, one of the examples is that he's almost mischievous too, because he's a kid, right? He's learning, and he pushes a friend out the window. He falls out of the barn and dies. And Christ comes down before the parents were able to come over to see what happened. He raises him from the dead. And then, of course, the child says, no, nothing happened. I just tripped. So Reuben is sent by God to help guide Christ, so he understands the purpose and the nature of his special abilities. And Reuben, in that essence, does what Virgil did in the book of the Aeneid, or does what who is it? I forget. In the book of Lucius, he takes him through the pit of despair, because in Judaic religion there was no heaven and no hell. There was no heaven and hell until Christ was crucified. Okay, the pit of despair in Judaism, and so Christ sees these people in the pit of despair, and that's kind of like purgatory, right? And then Reuben's explaining to him, there's going to be a heaven, there's going to be a hell, there's going to be a judgment day, and this is your purpose. And Christ says, if my Father is all-powerful and all-knowing, why does he create people that he will have to punish for all eternity in hell? And Reuben says to him, famously, listen, don't tell anybody this. But what's going to happen is that after Judgment Day and for a period of time, the people of heaven will cry out for mercy. They will plead with God to forgive their loved ones who suffer. God will look upon them and then will free them from their bondage. He will forgive them and free them. But if you tell them, that gives them license to commit sin and to separate themselves from God. So, in essence, it goes back to having a child. If you tell your child that, you're going to hug them and they're going to get ice cream, even though they did something wrong, okay, that gives them license to do whatever they want.
Right.
But if they know that there's a consequence, whether it be positive or negative based on their choice, then they can help make that.
Yeah,
that
I'd
choice.
sure like to believe that. I hope that that's the case. Sometimes I've had those theological. I'm not familiar with that book, but that specific
It's beautiful.
one. But I've had those conversations before, and yeah, I mean, I like the idea of that for sure. I think God's a relationship. I believe with a Christian God is a relationship person, like, and Christ is noted in the Quran. Lots of they said, I think in the Quran it says that Christ could speak as a newborn. Can you imagine your baby's born? He's like, hey, and probably spoke Greek and Hebrew and just some of those things. Like we've had conversations about, my friends and I, and yeah, that's a
But this
that's
book
a cool
wasn't.
Concept. I
It
hope
is.
you're right.
Well, it wasn't allowed in the
Hope they're
canon.
right.
It wasn't
Yeah.
allowed in the canon because the Catholic
Yeah.
Church didn't agree with it,
Right.
as well as the Book of Judas. But the point is that he's your father, and as a father, you have to understand the consequences of your action, and which case you will pay that consequence. But it's not an eternal consequence. He will eventually show you love and mercy, which some people struggle with because they're not familiar with this book. And they struggle with, well, why would you create Hitler? If he's going to kill a bunch of people and you're going to have to torture him for all of eternity, why even bother creating him?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
And so this concept is a neat concept. And again, it's romantic in nature because it shows that this is why Christ maybe didn't heal everybody. Right? Because some people have to make choices. This is why he couldn't give everybody everything that they need or want. And at the same time, why he forgives others and why he was so passionate about being available and giving things away and making the point that, a rich man has a harder time getting into heaven as a camel through the eye of a needle. Remember that story?
Yep.
So it's a beautiful romantic story. I just don't
But
know
I wouldn't
about
count
the
on it.
legitimacy. Yeah. Behave. Still be good.
I wouldn't count on it.
So, okay.
And I think that's one of the misconceptions about Christianity is like, and I had this misconception when I was a kid because my family wasn't poor, but we weren't wealthy, and my dad wasn't exactly a Christian. So my grandfather would take me to church, and I don't know if it was intentional or not intentional, but my parents wouldn't even buy me like nice clothes, or maybe, I don't know, I was young, maybe I wouldn't wear nice clothes, I don't know. But I remember these people like kind of staring at me and then asking me if I needed clothes, like I was, and I'm like, I'm not homeless, but I got this sense that like everybody was judging me. And then after I grew up and went to some good churches, and they may have been people doing that, I don't know. I come to realize that I was the one that was being judgmental, that they were judging me. Like a real Christian wouldn't be judging somebody for that reason, and if they are, then they're not really practicing their Christianity, and that can turn somebody away who doesn't really understand that.
Sure.
Like we're not perfect. In fact, the Bible was mostly written by murderers, David and Paul, Paul who was Saul. That's why it gets all complicated because we renamed everybody, right? But so we're not perfect. And if you're truly a Christian, you're like, you're not perfect. I'm going to screw stuff up. I'm going to screw something up today. I probably already have. You know what I mean? Like, and I probably, made somebody mad, or you didn't like what I said, or whatever, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, God takes that burden from us that says we got to be perfect, right? Christ did that for us, and but I will say, in our prison ministry, there were churches, and they're going to go unnamed, that we brought guys into the jail or from the jail to our services. And we used to do this little, like, we started it out in like a little back. We found a church that would give us a back trailer, and like half of the leaders were on board with it, and half of them weren't, and some of them didn't even know we were back there, and you know what I mean. But it's the redheaded stepchild of ministry.
Yeah, that's sad.
And you got guys that come in and they're all tattooed up, and they're, you know, at between service and the group we did, they'd be out there smoking cigarettes, and, you know, some of them are cussing, and, you know, you'd have to say, hey man, you know, just kind of tone that down. Well, what's wrong with cussing? Now you got to have a conversation about, with a grown man, why you shouldn't be cussing out in front of kids, you know. And
Yeah.
and usually I just default to like, hey, do you think Christ would talk like this? Like, you're trying to follow Christ and his example, right?
Right.
You think Christ was MFing out here in front of his church?
Yeah.
You think he was allowing people to sell things? You know, no.
No, you got
he fashioned a whip and turned over tables, and
That's right.
And probably what was the beginning of the end of getting killed, because the Romans aren't going to have any part of them messing with their money. So, you know. And that, going back to that whole church thing, I'm saying there was judgment there, and I know that turned people away, and it saddened me that happened, and you know, I don't ever want to see that happen. But if I'm not in control of that church, then you know what I mean, and I can't control what every person thinks. So if you're listening to this, and you know, maybe this becomes a big jail ministry podcast that prisoners listen to, and you get out, and you've grown to have this new relationship with Christ. And I'm going to steal some of the ideas of my friend who spent 2 years in solitary. He said, I thought, man, when I got out of jail, I was part of a gang again. I was part of the Christian gang, right? And I'm gonna meet these people, and they're gonna love on me just like the bike gang did. He said, but it wasn't like that at all. They were like, who's this long-haired, tattooed guy? You know, and nobody talked to me. He said, and I sat alone. And I went to another church, and I sat alone. And he said, and I felt judged, and some of that could have been his own feelings, but some of it's probably legit, right? Like, people. So if when you get out, you know, you may have to seek out a different church. Like, you may go and you may not feel comfortable, but that's okay. There's a home for you somewhere. You're going to find a place where you feel comfortable, and then you can relax in who you are and the people you're with, and then you can start to experience the community of Christ, because you gotta have, in order to do this and not miss out, because you don't want to miss out. Like, you don't want to miss out on community. You can find your way to heaven without ever going to church.
Sure.
You can do that. You need Christ in your life. You don't need people in your life. But you're missing out.
Now, Brian, that's a radical thought, because
You're missing out.
100 years ago, you know, you said you can find heaven without church. They would, you know.
Yeah, I know.
You'd
I've
have
been
been
hung
hanging out
up
with
right
Martin
now.
Luther.
You can find Christ. Truly, I believe you can find it without ever being exposed to the Bible. We were born innately, I think, with the ability to know what's right from wrong from the day we were born. If you ever struggle with all of those things, there's a great book. It's called Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Read that. It's great. If you're struggling with it, you probably have the same kind of mentality as I did, and that was a great book. It awakened me to some things. But that's Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. It's like $7 on Amazon. I don't get anything for this, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Other than the satisfaction of passing it on. But yeah, so find community. Whatever that looks like for you, no matter how long you have to seek it out. You don't have to read the Bible. You don't have to listen to Christian leaders. But if you don't, you're going to miss out.
I think
missing out on the gifts of what God's given you.
I think you come full circle with what you were saying earlier, as far as like, find what religion got right. It's men and women who represent that religion that screw it up.
Oh, we screw it up all the time.
You know, and I'm speaking because I was one of those individuals. I'm turned off from church, and the reason why was that when I was a young kid, you know, I grew up in a bad way. You know, I didn't have really any parents that wanted me. Group homes, and my brothers were of concern to me. And you know, I'm reading through these legal documents now that I'm older and I understand. a little bit more. I was told memories that never even happened. That's messed up.
Yeah.
And I'm reading through these documentations and through this document, and there's like things like the kids are so, the children are so misbehaved. They're terrible behaving children, and that's something I've always heard throughout my life from my parents and my grandparents. With my, but if you think about what that kid's going through, and any child that's put in a situation that my brothers and I were put into are going to be terribly behaved children. We went to church, and those church members, friends of mine that are really like brothers to me now, they were discouraged to hang out with me. I was the mischievous one because of the way I thought. I was the one that was going to get in trouble. I was the one that don't hang out with him because he doesn't have a father. Don't hang out with him because he's questioning things. Meanwhile, my buddies are bringing in smoking pot in the bathroom of the church, drinking, having sex. I didn't do any of that, but I was typecast as the one that's going to be problematic. Told, you're not going to make anything of your life. You're not going to school. You're not going to do anything. You're probably going to wind up in jail. Now, I did end up in jail a couple times, but that doesn't change the fact that like it really turned me off. It soured me.
Mm-hmm.
That judgment, the fact that I was being raised by a single parent was, and you're going to judge me? I'm a terrible person because of that? Don't agree. But it goes back to what you were saying. What did religion get right? There's a lot of great things, a lot of beautiful things that religion shares, that teaches you. It's the people around it that do it harm in the end.
Yeah.
And it's sad to say things like that, but if you were to look back in my history with my friends, they grew up in a 2-parent household. They had a home, they had consistency, they went to the same school, they got food, they got clothing. If they would have just took a second, and they claim to be Christians, and they claim to be people who are loving and caring and non-judgmental, but they were very judgmental. If they would have took a second to understand my background a little bit, maybe they would have had a little bit more insight as to why I question things,
Mm-hmm.
and why I present myself, and why my brothers behave the way they behave. But instead of doing that, they were quick to judgment. And then all that did was push me away,
Mm-hmm.
and turn me off.
Yeah.
Now that's not why I'm turned off with church. I'm very logical. I'm too logical. It questions it.
Mm-hmm.
But the point of the matter is that was not helpful at all.
No.
And I think people need to understand, if you're gonna represent something like that,
Mm-hmm.
do it the way you're supposed to do it. Like you're saying,
Yeah,
you're a perfect example.
I'm
Tom
not
is a-
though. I've done things wrong too. I'm sincerely. It's almost like like when your kid does something wrong, like or your brother does something wrong, and you feel bad because it's somebody that's close to you that's done something wrong. I sincerely apologize for.
But you own up to
what
it.
the church has done to you and lots of people.
Well, you don't
and
have
I don't,
to-
and I don't represent. Like I'm not.
No,
it's not
no.
because of me, but it's
Right.
almost like that feeling. Like man, I wish that hadn't happened. I really wish that hadn't happened to you. I really wish what happened to me hadn't happened to me, but it did. And I don't know why, but it did.
But
yeah.
you don't need to apologize for others. But you're setting a good example.
No,
Your wife is setting a great example.
Right.
Our coworker Tom, setting a great example.
And then on any given day, in any situation, we could snap and
That's right.
right. I mean, you know what I mean? We're all capable of that. Like if I've known guys who were sober from I don't know. I hate using sober for some things, but this is a person who has some anger issues. Had served some time in prison for nearly beating somebody to death, and he had a lot of time from actually being angry, and then something happened, and he beat a guy up. I'm like, well, hell, that's no good
Right.
representation of Christ, right? I don't remember Christ beating anybody up, and he felt horrible for it, But at any given day, any moment, we all fall short of who Christ is. I mean, that's.
But I think
That's a
the
fact.
difference is owning up to it, talking about it.
Yeah.
The approach. There's a colleague of ours, Javier. I don't know if you had a chance to talk with him.
Yeah.
He is probably the best example, in my opinion, of a Christian.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
He is. He truly walks the walk.
Mm-hmm.
He talks the talk and he walks the walk.
Yeah.
I love him to like no end. He is one of the greatest human beings I've ever seen in my life. And you talk about Christ, like I feel like not that he's like Christ, but he's striving, and his children are a representation of that, and his wife is as well, and that's who I want to be surrounded with.
Right. Yeah, me too.
And it's beautiful. I mean, he's a beautiful, beautiful man. So shout out to you if you're listening. He's not going to listen, but shout out for you. He's a great example of Christianity, in my opinion, and it sounds like you are as well, and so is Tom. And that's really the best you can offer. Again, find what's right within the religion, but understand that people are with flaws. They're not, they're going to make mistakes.
Yep.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or you feel good? Does your church or the group that you represent when you go into jails to minister to people, do they receive financial donations? Do they get any attention? Is there any plug that you want to give for them to help people be aware, so that way they come to the foresight and they don't feel like the redheaded stepchild?
We aren't affiliated with any specific church.
Okay.
And because
what's the name of the
Fresh Start Ministries? But if you Google search Fresh Start Ministries, they're going to be that's like almost like a generic name. We probably should have chose a better name, but here we are, and it's okay. So I can just, maybe you can put my email or something in a link or something if somebody, but if we're kind of keeping anonymous to where we are,
that's up to you if you want to do that.
Yeah. I would just put my email on tagged onto there. If somebody's now we're doing again, we can't get into the jail. But I love talking to people, so probably somebody will listen to this and maybe they have a family member who's in jail or something like that, and we've had that happen before, and we still are like corresponding with people in jail, and we're self-funded, so we just never really got it's not that expensive to do, I sort of feel like it's part of my tithing. That's we were going to get into money issue, but we'll shelve that.
We'll have you back on to talk about that.
We'll shelve that for another day, but so like guys get out of jail, we'll pick them up, and sometimes they're just wearing like these paper shorts because and slides, and they don't have anybody to pick them up, and you know what I mean. So the jail reaches out to us, and we'll pick them up, and we'll take them to Goodwill and pick out a week's worth of clothes or whatever, and buy that for them, take them out to lunch, and then take them to their halfway house or wherever they needed to go. And sometimes we'll have guys that'll pick them up and take them to work for the first month or something. It just all depends on a situation. So if you're, we're not the only organization that does that. We're unique in some ways, but we're very similar in others. So if you have a loved one who's in jail or prison even, and maybe you want somebody to correspond with them and maybe be there when they get out, you can email me, and if I can't help them because we're not in the same geographical location, then maybe I can try to hook them up with somebody who is doing that sort of thing.
Is there any way that anybody can support your ministries?
You mean like from a financial standpoint? They could definitely pray for us. They can definitely pray for us and pray for our work. Pray that God opens the doors of the jail so we can get back in there. I know these guys that are in there need it. They miss it. They've told us so as they've gotten out. So that would be the biggest help. And then beyond that, financially, I don't think we need any funds. We're fine. We're self-funded.
Anybody that wants to volunteer, is there any way for them? I guess they could just email you to
just email me. I'll get them in touch with Chris, because Chris is kind of in charge of all of that, and he's going to be the guy that's going to do the educating. Do
you want to tell them what your email is out loud, and then we'll include the link, or do you want me to just include the link?
Just include the link.
Okay.
Because I just find that it's better.
Okay.
Was that fine. An S or an F? And was that a 3? Yeah.
All right. Anything else at all? No, you're good.
Yeah.
We appreciate you coming on. And it was a good conversation, I think.
Great conversation. I loved it. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess this goes into our next thing, right? we want to remind everybody that we are trying to support 3 different charities. We want to let people know that if for whatever reason they'd like to donate to our Patreon account and help us keep this podcast going and keep it alive, we also will take 25% of those proceeds and put them towards cystic fibrosis, put them towards Muscular Dystrophy Association, as well as spinal muscular atrophy. We want to continue to foster the support that those associations provide to people who suffer with those ailments, and also try to foster the research being done to hopefully eventually prevent these conditions from occurring anyway. The other thing that we'd like to do is, as we do every podcast, we want to send a shout out to the people that inspired us. They gave us the aspiration to do this, so hopefully we're doing them right. And I'd like to say thank you to the Joe Rogan podcast. I want to say thank you to Sean Carroll and Sam Harris. Say thank you to Adam Meekins and Greg Lehman. All a bunch of beautiful people who inspire that higher level of thinking and gave us the willingness to sit down and discuss topics that we feel like everybody should have access to or an idea of. So we really appreciate your inspiration, and we really appreciate your help in supporting those associations. Thank you very much.